founder of the National Alliance for Targeted Parents, joins us on Secrets to Surviving Alienation. Hello, Kay.
Hi, Mom.
I know that nobody imagines that this happens in this world. It's hard to know it exists if it hasn't crossed your path. How do you begin to tell people about this hidden in plain sight part of the family court process?
How do you begin? I usually don't have to begin. Somebody contacts me because they already find themselves in a high conflict situation where the other parent has targeted them to take all of the punishment and the blame for everything that went wrong in the relationship when they've been in a relationship with a partner and have had children. So they will contact me and they will say, oh my God, what is going on? They're so traumatized by a situation that shouldn't exist in this world, that no parent, it is the worst possible situation that a parent could possibly have to go through. And that's where we get the name targeted parents, is because we are parents, we're the good guys. We're the parents who are mentally and physically healthy. We're the ones that have all the empathy. We're the ones that love our children more than life ourselves. And somehow we made the mistake of marrying someone who has a high conflict personality, and usually that's associated with a personality disorder. In family court, that's usually narcissism or borderline personality disorder. But in any case, we have been in a toxic relationship, and most targeted parents, they'll take a lot of that toxicity because they're trying to prevent their children from, they're trying to protect their children within the family. But then they see that the high conflict parent is starting to target the children and starting to mess with the children's psychology of what family and what love and what relationships are all about. And that's when we usually decide that we have to do something about this, and we enter family court. The problem is that family court is manipulated by the high conflict person, and we get targeted again. We get retargeted, we get re-traumatized by the fact that family court does not see the psychological abuse or some people call it narcissistic abuse, and they don't see what is happening to our children, and that's how it usually gets started. And so we're triple traumatized, and if targeted parents don't know what's going on, it's called trauma, psychological trauma, and nobody can understand psychological trauma unless you have been through it yourself. There are cohorts of people who have been through trauma, like combat veterans come back and they're traumatized. That's where we hear about psychological trauma. People who are in disasters usually experience psychological trauma. Targeted parents are the most traumatized parents in the world. Our worlds are just shattered by what is happening. Nothing makes sense. Everything that's supposed to be right is now wrong. Everything that is wrong is now the courts are saying is right. And our children get drawn into this conflict, and they get manipulated and they get coerced into aligning with the high conflict parent and turning against the one parent that they can count on to trust to give them the love and the compassion and the security that they need to grow up and to grow healthy.
Kay, is it always the case that these situations involve a shared custody situation, or is this usually the case where it's a shared custody situation?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. The courts, they always try to start with a presumption of shared custody, And so both parents are supposed to work together to provide what is in the best interest of the children. Unfortunately, a high conflict parent cannot communicate, they can't cooperate, and they can't co-parent. So and in the court system, you try, as targeted parents, we really try to work this out for the best interest of our children, but the high conflict parent doesn't allow that. They get on the offense. They attack us at every stage of the court system, and the court is always trying to. You'll hear courts say, the judge will say, you two just have to try to get along, or you two just need to work this out. They do not understand that a high conflict person, someone with a personality disorder, they're missing a part of their brain called empathy. And they can't feel what the children feel. They can't feel what you feel. They only have their own agenda. And their own agenda is to hurt the targeted parent, is to attack your target. So there's always, whenever, that's why there are high conflict cases where children are not involved. And the targeted parent, or it's not targeted parent, but the targeted partner, they'll attack them financially, they'll attack them emotionally, psychologically. They'll do anything to destroy that person's life. But the National Alliance for Targeted Parents, we specifically deal, because by far and away the majority of these cases are custody conflicts where the children are being left.
Kay, you use the word can't about a situation where it appears that you could have also used the word refuse. What's the difference between can't and refuse in this instance?
In these cases, the high conflict parent does not have the capability to feel empathy, does not have the capability to cooperate, to communicate. They're not refusing. I mean, this isn't just parents who aren't getting along. This is very, very different. This is a perpetrator-victim type of a relationship. And there's always a history that the relationship went off the rails a long time ago, and the targeted parent has been being emotionally and psychologically abused by the other parent, or as you since, after a certain amount of time, high parents they've developed a social persona because they've had this problem of not being able to get along with other people, and since they were about 5, actually coalesces in early adolescence. So they have never been able to get along with people because they actually lack empathy, which is the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, to understand how they feel, to care that somebody is hurting and provide some sort of a compassionate, empathetic response. They can't do that. It's not a refusal. It's basically there's an inability to do that. There is very little treatment for these people. There is some, but it's not the kind of treatment. They don't believe they have a problem. They believe that the problem is always external. There's always a conflict with somebody, and it's always somebody else's fault. They never take responsibility for their own actions.
The name of this show, Secrets to Surviving Alienation. Surviving is key. Identifying alienation is key. When we talk about targeted parents within the context of alienation, would you talk about how survivable this is, and is the key to surviving identifying exactly where you're at? Are you in alienation? Are you not in alienation? Are you just in a tough divorce? Are you not in just a tough divorce? What are the circumstances? How do we identify whether we belong in the world of your organization?
I don't think there's ever that question. If you're just in a tough relationship, there is something that can be worked out. You know that your partner has shown that they're capable of trying to work together, capable of having some related goals to work towards that have good solid morals and values. Targeted, alienation it's usually associated, alienation could be anybody alienated from anybody, but in our case, in our organization, it's that the other parent has actually coerced the children into aligning with them into it gets a little technical, it gets a little biological, it gets a little physiological and psychological, but they are able to manipulate and coerce and exploit the children's emotional vulnerabilities to actually turn them against the targeted parent. So you become alienated from your child and your child becomes alienated from you. So that would, and that's, there are some researchers, some authors that say that there are levels to alienation, mild, moderate, and severe. I don't buy that. As soon as your child, and I'm talking from experiencing, the day your child suppresses this loving attachment to you and all of a sudden becomes somebody you don't know, someone who you can't talk to, someone who says they don't love you, they say they hate you, they wish you were dead, they only want to live with the other parent. It's very extreme, and there are 23 million parents in the United States that are dealing with some type of alienation. A lot of those are in intact families. Those people we don't see. But if you're in a high conflict family court case, if you've been in family court for over 18 months, you are in a high conflict case, and there is and will be alienation because the high conflict person will, they recruit people to actually help them attack you as a person. You become, when this happens, it shatters your world. You become nuts. I mean, you feel crazy because this is not the way life is supposed to be. Life, all of our dreams blow up in our face. What we wanted for our children blows up in our face, and we don't know what to do about it. We don't know how to change things because everything we do is turned against us. And then the courts reinforce that, whatever the high conflict parent is saying. They use false allegations repeatedly. They attack you in every way that they can to make you look like the problem. It's called projection. It's very simple, is that they are actually the ones that have all the problems, but the only way they can survive their own personality disorder, the only way they can live is to project their problems onto another person and try to convince everybody else that that's the person with the problem. And they even convince our children. I do want to say, though, that in order to survive alienation, I think this is the first thing I say to every targeted parent, and I've talked to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, I've worked with hundreds of targeted parents, is that you have to understand that your children do still love you. They are in an impossible situation. They are in between the two people that they love and cherish and trust. And they've been told, and I tell this story quite often, is because I went through alienation about 12 years ago. There was a dozen years when I didn't see my kids because they hated me and didn't have anything to do with me. They did all kinds of terrible things to me. But I always knew that they loved me. Underneath this facade, that they had to, in order to survive in their situation with the high conflict parent, they have to do what that high conflict parent tells them to do. In the diagnostic textbooks on personality disorders, people with narcissism and borderline personality disorder, what they do to they treat their children as extensions of themselves, and they threaten abandonment. And children are so afraid that they're going to be left alone that they side with that parent. Just it's the only way they can cope. It's the only way they can cope. And yet we stand here and our children treat us like they never knew us. I mean, my son used to show him pictures of he and I when he was little, and he'd say, "Well, that's not me. I never did anything." And it's so crazy. It's like, well, I didn't have another child and to pick on. Of course, that's you. Why do you deny them? They have to deny themselves in order to please the high conflict parent. And the high conflict parent demands that they deny their relationship with us. So they suppress it.
What is the hard consequence to the child of this?
It's what the child is experiencing is a very unique and horrific form of trauma and childhood trauma. I will say the biggest thing there's an array of because they deal with so much trauma, having to betray themselves and betray a parent that they love. That there is the effects. There's a wide variety of physical and mental health problems that they do have the possibility of developing. Mostly, they have problems with relationships because they never had a role model about what a relationship was like. They watched one parent just destroy the other parent, and they had to be part of that. So as they grow older and they start to develop their own thinking, and one of the things that it suppresses their ability to critical think. A lot of their developmental skills go offline, especially their emotional development becomes derailed and can become damaged, but at least a lot of times it just becomes it just stays like that, usually in the adolescent years. Most of the children that we see in high conflict family court are adolescents, because that's the stage of their development in which they are most vulnerable to psychological or emotional manipulation and exploitation. So that's and so it's everything that they learn in those adolescent years that becomes subject to distortion or derailment. Does that answer your question?
Yes, very, very much so. It's impossible for us to imagine what the children are going through.
It is. We think we feel so much grief, and that's what we feel. I mean, the loss is so horrendous for us. They compare it to, you can compare it to a child dying. Actually, the trauma that targeted parents feel is even worse than a parent or a child that dies, because at least there is some there is some end point. Our grief is ambiguous. Our grief has no end. We know our child is out there, but our child is dead to us. They're dead emotionally. We don't see them. They're dead physically. And we think that, and think of how we're traumatized, or even think about how combat veterans are traumatized. Now think about that. We would never send a child into combat, because emotionally they just couldn't handle it. But that's exactly what alienation does. It sends a child into combat against their own self, against the parent that they love. It is what targeted parents need to do most of all for their children is love them through this. even though we're the ones that are hurting. We're the ones that wake up in the morning and think, oh my God, this can't be another day. We're the ones that have the nightmares and the terror, all the things that go along with trauma. Excuse me, my hair's a little wacky, but children are so vulnerable when they're going through this type of trauma. We just have to remember that it's not us that, that are hurting as much as they are. And I used to say to my son when he would rage and say all kinds of terrible, horrible things, I would just say to him, there isn't anything that you can ever say or do to me that will stop me from loving you. We just have to love them through this, because when they finally are able to get away from the high conflict parent, their attachment does resurface, and you will eventually have a relationship with them again. But if I had known that it was going to be 9 years, I don't know that I could have waited that long. And 30% of targeted parents do commit suicide because the grief is so great. Children don't even know that that's an option. They just have to stay living with a high conflict parent until the time that they can actually get away from them and see that this is not the real world. In the real world, children have two parents who love them and really love them more than life.
So before we let you go, we're so grateful for your time and your expertise. Often, the parent who is doing the alienating has a lawyer. How can professionals assist, support, and encourage this kind of horrible behavior, even if it's legal? Have we had a glitch?
Are you still with us?
Secrets to Surviving Alienation is bringing crusaders and warriors together so that we can survive. And we are here in service to help you survive. The statistics that 30% of parents that go through this end up committing suicide is a driving factor. We have to help these parents. We have to help these children. We are in service in a system that is aligning resources. Being crusaders and warriors does not come easy.
If you know somebody going through this, there's plenty of groups on Facebook. Father's Rights Movement, Stop Parental Alienation, Stop Custodial Interference. If you know anybody that has kids that's doing this to their kids and to a target parent, he must speak up. This is child abuse. It's not okay. If there were physical marks that you could see on your kid, you wouldn't be doing that. Or maybe you would. But it just shows what kind of unfit parents there are out there. Because somebody doesn't want to be with you no more. Someone moved on because toxicity. You can't use children as pawns. It's affecting the child for your own selfish reasons, frivolous reasons. So if you know anybody going through this or anybody that you are personally close with and you're allowing them to do this right in your face and not say anything, then shame on you. All my Goggins fans, stay hard.